Cable removal in commercial office buildings is an important aspect of lease agreements that requires careful consideration by both landlords and tenants. Landlords typically require tenants to remove their own cables upon termination of the lease. The purpose of this requirement is to ensure that the building's infrastructure remains clear and organized for future tenants. In some instances, landlords may charge fees for cable removal if it is not completed by the tenant. From a tenant's perspective, they may prefer to leave cables in place for future use, aiming to avoid the cost associated with removal. Alternatively, tenants might contend that cable removal is not a standard maintenance obligation. Additionally, some tenants express concern regarding potential damage to their equipment during the cable removal process. Lease agreements generally address cable removal responsibilities. It is crucial for tenants to thoroughly review these provisions and negotiate any necessary modifications before signing the lease. Common approaches include tenant responsibility, where tenants are fully responsible for removing all of their cables upon lease termination. Another approach is landlord-assisted removal, where landlords assist tenants with cable removal for a fee. A third approach is joint responsibility, where landlords and tenants share the burden of cable removal, with the tenant responsible for removing cables in their leased space and the landlord responsible for removing cables in common areas. To ensure a smooth cable removal process, several experiences and considerations should be taken into account. Firstly, clear communication between landlords and tenants is crucial. Secondly, tenants should plan ahead of time for cable removal, allowing sufficient time and resources for the task. Thirdly, tenants should document the presence and location of their cables to facilitate the removal process. Fourthly, landlords and tenants should coordinate cable removal schedules to avoid disruptions to other occupants. Fifthly, cable removal can involve electrical hazards. Therefore, tenants should ensure proper safety precautions are in place. Lastly, tenants may consider sustainable cable disposal methods such as recycling or repurposing. Focusing on market trends, there is a trend towards greater tenant responsibility for cable removal. Many landlords are incorporating provisions into leases that require tenants to remove all of their cables upon lease termination. Tenants should be aware of these requirements and negotiate accordingly to protect their interests. When considering cable removal in commercial buildings, it's important to understand the types of cables commonly encountered. These can include network cables such as Category 5E, Category 6, and fiber optic cables, which transmit data. There are also electrical cables that supply power to various devices and systems. Coaxial cables are used for video and internet signals, and low-voltage cables may control lighting or security systems. Each type of cable requires different handling procedures during removal. For example, fiber optic cables are fragile and require careful handling to avoid damage. High-voltage electrical cables require adherence to strict safety protocols to prevent electrical shock. Before any cable removal work begins, it's essential to conduct a thorough site survey. This survey should identify all cables to be removed, their routing paths, and their termination points. Documentation is key during this process. Cable mapping can be a great way to document the cables and their locations. Accurate records of cable types, locations, and connections will help prevent accidental disconnection of active services. This also facilitates the safe and efficient removal of abandoned cables. Landlords and tenants should agree on the scope of work. The agreement needs to detail which cables need to be removed and who is responsible for disconnecting them. It should also specify the acceptable methods for cable removal and any required restoration work. Having a written agreement can help prevent misunderstandings and disputes later on. When it comes to safety, working with electrical and communication cables can pose various hazards. Electric shock is a significant risk when dealing with energized cables. It's crucial to de-energize circuits before disconnecting any electrical cables. Lockout/tagout procedures should be followed to ensure circuits remain de-energized during the work. Another consideration is the potential exposure to hazardous materials. Some older cables may contain lead or asbestos, which can be harmful if inhaled or ingested. Proper personal protective equipment, including gloves, respirators, and eye protection, should be worn when handling these materials. Fall protection is also important. Working at heights to remove cables can increase the risk of falls. Use ladders, scaffolding, or aerial lifts to safely access cables. Ensure that all equipment is properly inspected and maintained. Proper training is also very important. Workers should be trained in safe cable removal techniques, electrical safety, and hazard awareness. This training should be documented and regularly updated. Cable removal can impact building operations. Removing active cables can disrupt services such as internet, phone, and security systems. It's crucial to coordinate cable removal with building occupants to minimize disruptions. Providing advance notice of planned outages will allow occupants to make alternative arrangements. After cables are removed, the space they occupied may need to be restored. This could involve patching holes in walls or ceilings, repairing cable trays, or repainting surfaces. The lease agreement should specify who is responsible for restoration work and the acceptable standards for repairs. Proper disposal is also important. Abandoned cables can create a fire hazard and impede future work. Properly disposing of cables helps prevent these problems. Consider recycling whenever possible. Many cable materials, such as copper and aluminum, can be recycled. This reduces waste and conserves resources. Work with a certified recycler to ensure cables are properly processed. Always comply with local regulations. Cable disposal is subject to environmental regulations. Check with local authorities to ensure compliance with all applicable rules and guidelines. The NEC, or National Electrical Code, provides guidance on the proper handling and removal of abandoned cables. NEC Section 725.3, for example, requires the removal of abandoned Class 2 and Class 3 cables. Other NEC sections may apply depending on the type of cable and the specific installation. When negotiating lease agreements, be sure to address cable removal responsibilities clearly. This can help prevent disputes later on. Define the scope of work, specifying which cables need to be removed and who is responsible. Allocate costs for cable removal, specifying who will pay for labor, materials, and disposal fees. Set deadlines for cable removal, providing a reasonable time frame for the work to be completed. Establish penalties for non-compliance, such as fines or other remedies. Consider using a cable removal addendum to the lease agreement. This addendum should outline all of the cable removal requirements in detail. It should be reviewed by legal counsel to ensure it is enforceable. There are several emerging trends in cable removal. One is the increased use of technology. Drones are being used to inspect cable routes and identify abandoned cables. Software is being used to manage cable inventories and track removal progress. Another trend is a focus on sustainability. More companies are looking for ways to recycle or repurpose abandoned cables. This reduces waste and promotes environmental stewardship. A third trend is a shift towards bundled services. Some companies offer cable removal as part of a broader suite of services such as IT asset disposition or data center decommissioning. When planning a cable removal project, it's important to follow a systematic approach. First, assess the scope of work, identifying all cables that need to be removed. Second, develop a plan that outlines the removal process, safety procedures, and disposal methods. Third, obtain the necessary permits, consulting with local authorities to determine any required permits or approvals. Fourth, notify building occupants in advance of any planned disruptions. Fifth, execute the removal plan, following all safety procedures and best practices. Sixth, inspect the work to ensure all cables have been removed and the space has been properly restored. Cable removal is more than just pulling wires. It's a complex process that requires careful planning, coordination, and execution. By following these guidelines, landlords and tenants can ensure that cable removal projects are completed safely, efficiently, and in compliance with all applicable regulations. In commercial buildings, cable management is an ongoing process, not just a one-time event. Regularly inspect cable infrastructure to identify abandoned cables. Maintain accurate records of cable installations and removals. Enforce cable management policies to prevent the accumulation of abandoned cables. Educate building occupants about proper cable management practices. These steps will help keep cable infrastructure organized and safe. Before initiating any cable removal, identify all stakeholders involved, including the landlord, tenant, building management, and any contractors. Each stakeholder has different responsibilities and expectations. Establish clear communication channels between all stakeholders to ensure everyone is informed and aligned. Hold regular meetings to discuss progress, address concerns, and resolve any issues that arise. Cable removal is a collaborative effort that requires teamwork and cooperation. To mitigate potential risks associated with cable removal, develop a comprehensive risk management plan. Identify potential hazards such as electrical shock, falls, and exposure to hazardous materials. Assess the likelihood and severity of each hazard. Implement control measures to reduce or eliminate these risks. Monitor the effectiveness of these control measures and make adjustments as needed. Risk management is an ongoing process that should be integrated into all aspects of the cable removal project. Consider environmental factors. Cable removal can have an environmental impact. Improper disposal of cables can contaminate soil and water. Consider the environmental impact of cable disposal methods and choose sustainable options whenever possible. Work with certified recyclers to ensure cables are properly processed. Promote environmental stewardship by reducing waste and conserving resources. When dealing with telecommunications cables, be aware of the potential for sensitive data to be stored on these cables. Data security is a major concern in today's digital age. Ensure that all data stored on telecommunications cables is securely erased before disposal. Use data sanitization methods that comply with industry standards and regulations. Protect sensitive data by implementing appropriate security measures. When planning cable removal, budget appropriately for all aspects of the project, including labor, materials, disposal fees, and permits. Obtain multiple bids from qualified contractors to ensure competitive pricing. Develop a detailed budget that outlines all anticipated expenses. Track actual expenses against the budget to identify any variances. Cost control is essential for ensuring the project stays within budget. Consider the timing of cable removal. Cable removal can disrupt building operations, so it's important to schedule the work at a time that minimizes disruption. Avoid scheduling cable removal during peak business hours or on holidays. Coordinate the work with building occupants to minimize inconvenience. Proper timing can help ensure the project is completed smoothly and efficiently. In addition to NEC requirements, be aware of any local or state regulations that may apply to cable removal. These regulations may cover topics such as electrical safety, hazardous materials, and waste disposal. Consult with local authorities to determine any applicable regulations. Compliance with all applicable regulations is essential for avoiding penalties and ensuring the safety of workers and building occupants. When documenting cable removal, create a detailed record of all work performed, including the date, time, location, and type of cables removed. Include photographs or videos of the work to provide visual documentation. Store these records securely and make them available to authorized personnel. Accurate documentation is essential for demonstrating compliance with regulations and resolving any disputes that may arise. Cable removal is a critical aspect of commercial building maintenance. By following these best practices, landlords and tenants can ensure that cable removal projects are completed safely, efficiently, and in compliance with all applicable regulations. This will help maintain the integrity of building infrastructure and promote a safe and healthy environment for all occupants. When dealing with older buildings, there may be legacy cable systems that are difficult to identify or remove. These systems may contain hazardous materials or be entangled with other building systems. Exercise extra caution when working with legacy cable systems. Consult with qualified experts to identify and assess these systems. Develop a plan for safely removing or managing these systems. Taking extra precautions when dealing with legacy cable systems can help prevent accidents and ensure the safety of workers and building occupants. Cable removal is an ongoing process that requires continuous improvement. Regularly review cable management practices and identify areas for improvement. Implement changes to improve efficiency, safety, and sustainability. Stay up to date on the latest industry trends and best practices. Continuous improvement is essential for ensuring that cable removal remains effective and efficient. In summary, cable removal in commercial buildings is a complex process that requires careful planning, coordination, and execution. By understanding the responsibilities of landlords and tenants, negotiating lease agreements effectively, and following best practices for safety, compliance, and sustainability, you can ensure that cable removal projects are completed successfully. This will help maintain the integrity of building infrastructure and promote a safe and healthy environment for all occupants. The National Electrical Code, in Section 800.2, defines abandoned cable as installed communications cable that is not terminated at equipment other than a connector and not identified for future use with a tag. This definition is important in understanding the scope of cable removal. The NEC addresses the requirements for the removal of abandoned cables to prevent fire hazard and ensure safety. Specific requirements for removal depend on the type of cable and its location. For example, Section 725.3b of the NEC requires the removal of exposed abandoned Class 2 and Class 3 cables. These cables are commonly used for low-voltage power and control circuits. The NEC also addresses the removal of abandoned communications cables in Section 800.52. This section requires that abandoned communications cables be removed unless they are contained in a raceway. The NEC defines a raceway as an enclosed channel designed expressly for holding wires, cables, or busbars, with additional functions as permitted in this code. The purpose of requiring the removal of abandoned cables is to reduce the fire load in buildings. Abandoned cables can contribute to the spread of fire and make it more difficult for firefighters to extinguish the flames. By removing these cables, the risk of fire is reduced and the safety of building occupants is improved. In addition to fire safety, the removal of abandoned cables can also improve the appearance and organization of a building. Abandoned cables can clutter cable trays and create a messy and unprofessional look. Removing these cables can make the space more organized and easier to maintain. When removing abandoned cables, it's important to follow safe work practices. Wear appropriate personal protective equipment, such as gloves and eye protection. To energize any circuits before disconnecting electrical cables. Use proper tools and techniques to avoid damaging other cables or equipment. Dispose of the cables properly, following all applicable environmental regulations. The cost of cable removal can vary depending on the size and complexity of the project. Factors that can affect the cost include the number of cables to be removed, the type of cables, the location of the cables, and the labor rates in the area. Before starting a cable removal project, it's important to get a detailed estimate from a qualified contractor. The estimate should include all costs associated with the project, including labor, materials, and disposal fees. Consider the potential impact of cable removal on building operations. Removing active cables can disrupt services such as internet, phone, and security systems. It's important to coordinate cable removal with building occupants to minimize disruptions. Provide advance notice of planned outages and work with building occupants to find alternative arrangements. Cable removal is an important part of maintaining a safe and organized building. By following the requirements of the NEC and using safe work practices, you can ensure that cable removal projects are completed successfully. Cable removal should be included in your commercial building's preventative maintenance plan. Regular inspections should be conducted to identify abandoned cables. These inspections should be documented and any abandoned cable should be scheduled for removal. There may be tax incentives available for recycling or repurposing cable materials. Check with local authorities for information on tax incentives and rebates. Recycling or repurposing cable materials can save money and improve sustainability. When preparing a request for proposal or RFP for cable removal, be sure to include the following information: the scope of work, including the number and type of cables to be removed, the location of the cables, the schedule for the work, the safety requirements, the disposal requirements, the insurance requirements, the references that are needed. Providing detailed information in the RFP will help ensure that you receive accurate and competitive bids. Also, remember to ask for proof of insurance. Insurance protects everyone. Document cable locations with cable markers. The markers should have a permanent adhesive and should have the circuit it controls, the voltage, and the panel location. Make sure the panel schedules are also updated. Before cutting abandoned electrical cabling, verify the circuit is not energized. Use a non-contact tester to do this. If the non-contact tester detects voltage, investigate further, as the wire may still be energized. Also, when removing data cabling, be sure to wear eye protection to avoid any debris from entering your eyes. There are many different types of cabling, from network to telephone to audio-visual. Each cable has its own purpose. However, when cabling is abandoned, it is important to remove it, as it takes up valuable space. Furthermore, it is important that the cabling be properly disposed of and recycled when possible. Some cabling has copper, aluminum, and other recyclable metals.